Hello. A lot of people have been sending us messages about a particular drug to help with COVID that they've heard about and want to know my opinion. Now, some of you have heard about it. It's called ivermectin, and this is really big in both North America and South America, where it's always been hitting the headlines as an alternative to vaccination. And it's going hand in hand with evidence that anti-vaxxers are having that there is a viable alternative. And it's seen as a solution to cutting viral illness and avoiding the need for vaccines, i.e. using it preventively long term. But rather than a solution, I think that it is more of a problem than a solution. I'll explain why. So first, what is ivermectin? It's a drug often used mainly in animals actually to prevent parasites and worms, and is referred to as a deworming agent. And it's also approved in certain countries for human use, and in the UK it's mainly used for severe forms of scabies. So not something you often get or want to get. But it can be used for some rare tropical infections as well. But it's not a household drug, and most doctors have never used it. And it can also be used topically as a cream for some conditions, head lice, or occasionally used for some skin conditions. But it really is rare, and so your GP will never have prescribed it. Now, the role in animals and humans is quite different. The doses is obviously different in a horse or a cow to a human, and it's not easy to switch from one to another. And unfortunately, that has happened a lot in some countries where the veterinary product is available more than the human one. It's not currently approved in major countries such as the UK or the US or Europe for any viral infection. It's also not approved for long-term prevention as far as I'm aware. And that's an important fact. So why do people get so excited about ivermectin? Why do they think it works so well? And there are a number of reasons for this, and a lot of it is driven by some of the medical research that's come out in various forms. I'm going to discuss these with you. There was a key paper at the end of last year stating that ivermectin as a treatment had reduced COVID deaths by 90%, which is an incredible figure, vastly better than any other medications we got, even corticosteroids, which are commonly used now. However, this paper has now been withdrawn due to major claims of data manipulation, inconsistency, inaccuracies, i.e. suspected scientific fraud. There was a second paper, again showing beneficial results, which was pre-printed, that's without review, and that's also been retracted again for the same reasons. And there are a number of other treatment papers which have been published. Most of them are of low quality and in very poor journals that don't get full review as much as we'd like. But I think the key element here is whether you should be using ivermectin instead of vaccination to prevent disease. And a lot of people were encouraged by this paper from Argentina, which was written by 5 Argentinian doctors who persuaded 1,400 of their colleagues to take ivermectin or a nasal spray compared to normal PPE and protective use. It wasn't a proper trial, but it was like an observational study. And over the course of a few months, they found that zero of the doctors who took the ivermectin and a seaweed nasal spray developed COVID. This was too good to be true, and as often in medicine, that seems to be the case. One author has withdrawn after claims that this data really was not possible. The authors stated they did this without any funds, very rapidly, and yet anyone who's done this kind of clinical trial knows it's a massive operation, would have cost perhaps $0.5 to $1 million in funding to do it in any basic form. And so most people are disregarding this paper. And just all the studies in this area, of course, they're produced rapidly. They're either in preprints or they're published in very poor quality journals that don't really care about the quality of the paper in it. They just get thousands of dollars and publicity from publishing it. Now, these papers have gained a lot of traction, driven a lot by what's going on in particularly Central and South America, where some countries like Nicaragua have said they're using it on their wards, etc. And social media has also done a lot to drive this, with influencers, celebrities like Joe Rogan going public to say that he's been taking it.
So who said, or did you already want ivermectin?
Well, I had this guy on, Dr. Pierre Corey, and he is, what is the organization he's from? Frontline COVID Critical Care Workers. So I had him on, and he had talked to me about it. He's not the only doctor that told me to take it. Multiple doctors told me to take it.
Mm-hmm.
He also went on to say that he thinks it's a good drug because the inventors got the Nobel Prize.
It's an American company.
Mm-hmm.
They won the Nobel Prize in 2015 for use in human beings.
Yeah.
And CNN is saying I'm taking horse dewormer.
It may be a great drug, but just not for this particular indication. Just like insulin and streptomycin also got Nobel Prizes, but they are useless for COVID. There are reports that states in the US like Oklahoma are seeing increased numbers of people with overdose of ivermectin, most of them using the veterinary form that's used in cattle, and the names and the doses are not equivalent. And although I believe some of these cases have been hyped by the media who are sort of reacting the other way to this, there clearly are some cases out there, although I think it's not an epidemic of overdose as has been portrayed. The idea behind this initially, which you could understand more, that it was a stopgap before people were able to get vaccines, before they were rolled out, seemed more reasonable than it does now, when in most of the countries, certainly in North America and Europe and Asia, vaccines are available. But you can see why people were desperate to use cheap other drugs instead, who don't have access to vaccines. But I think now we know that vaccines are effective, we have to really be a bit more critical about the use of these other kinds of replacements. So what's the evidence that ivermectin does work? Well, initially this came from test tube studies suggesting that it might inhibit some of the transport proteins that the virus hijacks in our bodies to get into our respiratory tracts and multiply. So it might just have some general mechanism of stopping it getting in. It might stop it docking with the spike protein. There's another thing. But these test tube studies are often unreliable and often difficult to replicate. But the proof is never in these theoretical studies, it's in the clinical trials. And I think what we've seen is there is no good quality clinical trial that's shown a clear benefit for either treatment or prevention. And there have been some people who have been collecting all the studies, putting them together in what we call a meta-analysis. So you would see if there was a general trend in a direction to get a result, and the conclusion was that most of the studies were too small, of poor quality, to get a clear result. Now, this doesn't rule out a small effect, and absolutely that is still possible, but there's absolutely no evidence that it should be used for the treatment or the prevention of COVID-19 at the moment, based on data. Now, to sum up, is it an alternative treatment or vaccine? The answer is no. It really isn't. It doesn't pass any of those standards. And I worry that, particularly for prevention, the idea that you can use this long-term, months or years, to have an effect against the virus is really, really risky, because even if it did work, you might be causing yourself much more damage to your body, because it wasn't intended for use for very long term in humans. And there have been reports in the normal people using it for normal parasitic problems of vomiting, diarrhea, seizures, delirium, and occasionally death. And of course, I worry about its effect on the gut microbes. If it's like a bit like Domestos, it sort of kills all microbes, then you are going to cause some collateral damage. And if you damage your gut microbes, you will damage your immune system long term. So the other thing to mention is that there's no evidence it's actually an antiviral drug. Hasn't been used to kill off other viruses, only parasites and worms. So I think you're better off getting the approved vaccines, maintaining good hygiene, and keeping a safe distance for others, and leave these other speculative drugs well away. We don't need drugs like this at the moment that are, if they do work, have a tiny effect, but a totally unknown side effect profile. Thank you for those questions. Do keep sending them in. Think of what your next question would be, what this debate, what is the overhyped area of COVID that you want to talk about next. Stay safe, keep logging. Thanks for your support.